Aloha. With this video, I just wanted to kind of go into a deeper perspective of the personal relationships that we have from my own perspective of kind of like the one-on-one relationships or personal relationships sort of perspective. I haven't done a video like this in a while, and I thought it was just felt like in the mood to speaking about it because I'm at a point now to where it's my perspectives on that situation are more comfortable and level, and have they have a sense of time passing. So as time passes, the clarity comes with the time passing, and the higher perspectives, or the most effective perspectives for our own expansion, don't usually show themselves until way down the line. Initially, our immediate responses to whatever's going on is instinctually kind of emotional, kind of like a child responds to pain by crying, so the parent can take care of that child. Extreme responses, like emotional responses or pain receptor responses, have a purpose for immediate what's the term, attention, immediate focus. Like, this needs to be dealt with right now because you have no other way of perceiving this reality other than the lowest common denominator, which is like an emotional response, or could be like a compared to a child, like I said, a child responding because they don't understand something. A child doesn't get its way, who's spoiled, will respond when they don't get their way. They will respond emotionally and victimize themselves and do all kinds of things that are very similar to the way man children or woman children act and portray themselves in the regular everyday. So yeah, I just wanted to start there and then go into a lot of, or not a lot, but just really, like, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about, we were just talking about like society and the individuals and relationships too, and how so many people are, so fucked up in so many different ways, not because they are fucked up individuals or fucked up souls, or something's wrong with them. See, a lot of the time what the system wants to do is say that something, put all the blame on the individual. I'm not saying there is no blame on the individuals, or there is no responsibility on the individual. That's a better term to use. What I'm saying is that there is also a macro attack, a psychological and spiritual attack on the masses, which ends up being the majority of how people act and interact every day. So in order for the establishment to maintain its authority and like regime sort of oversight over you, is to perceive or portray what's going on in the world from the perspective of, this is the backside of like the democracy, the fake democracy. It says, okay, well, you elected us, you as the masses elected us, the individuals, the politicians, to do this. So we are representing you. But that's never was the case for the individuals on this land. It was the case for the pirates of this land. And the pirates of this land pirated other lands and then created a pirate system based upon parasiting and pirating, looting the land and the resources and the individuals, looting the consciousness of the indigenous people, looting the real science, looting the real spirituality, and turning it into this new age bullshit. looting the interpretations of this reality, flipping and reversing them, and selling them back to us in a way that will completely cause chaos, and then they maintain the perspectives of them being the order out of that chaos. So when they tell you that your origins are chaos and nothingness and emptiness out of the Big Bang and so on and so forth, then you are okay for being a chaotic, empty, purposeless, protoplasmic blob of nothing. So once that is your starting point, you can be shaped and molded into whatever the system wants you to be. And one of the main things the system wants you to be is chaotic and lost in a space of codependency, victimization, and having no anchors or no any kind of real empowerment, self-empowerment for yourself. Your power comes from the idea of the human evolutionary system, which is the so-called democracy, so-called capitalism, the so-called Western world, and the New World, and everything that's built on the blood and the bones of the indigenous Aboriginal cultures of the entire world. This entire system is built on top of that. And in order to maintain that, it has to act like it has been deemed by God to genocide because of evolution, through the idea of monkeys evolving from animalistic destroyers to this less destructive human being, which is still destructive, just not as destructive as a fucking monkey. So that's how we accept the destructive actions of these inhumane parasites. So this is what's being sold to us every single day. Our bar for what we accept as anything of a higher perspective of who and what we are in this reality is completely, that whole bar is lowered to below sometimes even animalistic behaviors. So we have no real motivation for being anything better than a piece of shit, really, because pieces of shit are what's the term? They're worshipped as deities in this mentality, in this world. And when you have those empty, soulless creatures that are the role models for masses of people, you're going to get your chaos. And then you're not going to have to do much to provide order out of that chaos. You could just, be... you can just provide the basic of the basic, and that's what's happening today in society. So the main point in looping back to the relationships is that our relationship with each other is every relationship is a reflection of every relationship. So a relation in some kind of way, however small or however large, there's a percentage there. So the relationships that you have with society and friends and all that, they're going to be reflective in some kind of way in personal relationships. So if you have a self-destructive, chaotic, codependent, victimized relationship with the society, you're going to have that in many different ways with yourself, with your family, with your school, with your teachers, with your counselors, with your doctors. This is going to shockwave through, because that's a macro bar that has been lowered forever, or for a purpose, to last for an extended amount of time, for a purpose of control and profit off of your ignorance, profit off of your complacency, your complicit nature, like everything is a profit share. So like I was saying, Taco Bell has an algorithm for making you shit yourself, because the more times that the masses of people shit themselves in a day means more money, is the bottom line. So if they put like a diuretic in your food, or if they sell you food, think about it, like from a business perspective. If I was, Captain Taco Bell right now, and I was, selling you some fucking food, and you was eating it regardless, So scientifically, my main thing would be, if I was just a heartless, soulless creature like the system is, my main thing would be profit based, and you're eating trash. Like, you're eating plastic, you're eating, animal products, potentially, human products like food, like all kinds of shit. And then trash, plastic. They're just putting horse meat and all kinds of stuff. Human meat, you can name it. It's in there. This is why they name things like natural. Like, technically, human fingernails are natural. So if they say natural flavoring, they're putting like the chopped off, the circumcised penises of circumcised foreskins of children, like Sandra Bullock. This is on Ellen talked about this, or with Sandra Bullock on her show. This ain't no made up shit. These are alchemists. Everything is about alchemy. So they are already living in that spiritual warfare. They are already reaping the benefits of that, the spiritual warfare at our expense, because we have been kept in the dark of our own spiritual potentialities outside of this bullshit, spirit molecule, DMT, Oprah, Joe Rogan sponsored reality. It's all bullshit. So, now that people are really getting into the discussion and really looking at what's going on, we're starting to realize that this system, it should have never existed in the first place. It was like an implant. It was an artificial implant, like an RFID implant into our consciousness. And we kind of took like a side route or a down route, kind of like in Back to the Future 2, when Doc Brown was explaining the alternate 1985, where Biff runs the whole, or is the president of the, he's like a casino manager, he's like a rich man or something like that, he's running for president or something like that. And so these have shock waves. So this is why I say it's so important to take advantage of, the time that you have. Like, you're awake right now. Like, you woke up in the morning. Like, what are you gonna do? Not saying like, oh, it's so wonderful, this beautiful. It's beautiful. There's some fucked up shit here too. And if you're complex enough, if you've challenge yourself to be a complex individual, you will see the beauty in what you have to do, in the light and the dark. Like, how you affect all these worlds, not simple in this like good and evil shit that's fairy tales and horror story books that they try to sell you to keep you from looking. No, getting into complex alchemy. Like, I'm not saying that I'm like deep into that space. I just know that it's a realm that exists inside of each and every individual. And like I was explaining, to loop back to the relationship stuff, it goes into like your relationship with time is also another relationship qualification in relationships with other individuals. So like, what kind of relationship do you have? What kind of relationship you have with yourself is going to be reflective of what kind of relationship that you will have with like me. So in some kind of way, if you have a fucked up relationship, like if you're self-hating and all kinds of other stuff, that's going to exist in your relationship with somebody else in many different kinds of ways. And a lot of the times when people get in relationships with somebody else, they do it a lot of the times to escape their relationship with themselves. So when they are trying to escape their relationship with themselves, in order to not look at themselves, they project parts of themselves onto their partners. And their partners don't know how to respond to that, because most of the times their partners are fucked up. Like I said, the subconscious and the macro scale still exists in everybody. So a large, percentage of the individuals, just think of it as like a blend or a dance between the individual, the macro and the micro percentages, and you're affected by the moon and the sun, the weather, everything, each other, all this other stuff is all one big dance, and it shifts over time. So when you engage in a relationship, what tends to happen when society is so fucked up? See, this is why I said in previous videos they have to focus so much on like getting married, getting a ring, having kids, like doing it like immediately. It's the American dream. It's the American way. It's like getting married and having kids is as American as apple pie. Like, it's the thing to do because of the way those tentacles or those hooks from the parasite lock into us. They lock into that which is natural. So, like, sex is natural. So this is why sex is promoted and used so much, like, to sell fucking cheeseburgers. And how pornography is used to dumb down your spiritual nature, your relationship with yourself, with each other, the divineness of who and what we are just gets turned into kind of like a meat package, like a fancy, attractive meat suit, a fancy, attractive meat suit. And you're in love with that, a fancy, attractive meat suit. That fancy, attractive meat suit has a great job and, you know, has a legacy family. They have a meat suit, a fancy, attractive meat suit legacy family. And those legacy families are going to link up with this legacy family. See, this is laughable in a sense right now, but no, this shit is real. Like, this is very political. I'm speaking from perspectives of like real, like what I'm envisioning, what I'm seeing in my head right now. When I'm sharing this with you, because other people, and this is going to trip some people, not really trip some people out, but some people are going to see it differently now because they're not really seeing where I'm coming from, because I'm the only one that can really see where I'm coming from right now before I say it. But in that discussion, or in that whole idea of what it means to be like in a relationship and build that whole thing up, how I'm seeing this as I'm sharing this is like where my name comes from. So my last name comes from the original like slave man, like a big slave master family in Louisiana. And when I started doing the research on the ancestry, like the storylines of how everybody connected, it was normal for one big ass family to like rich family members, like even in like the English, you know, that whole, what is that, monarchy and all that other stuff. What is that? In like Alice in Wonderland, when they were trying to hook Alice up with that one dude that fucking, what is he? He's a, what the hell do they call those people who are knights? Not knights, but lord. Yeah, lord. You'll never find you'll never find another lord, you know, at his age or some shit, like whatever that is. That whole made up thing. Anyway, fuck, now I lost my train of thought of what I was talking about. Relationships, society, dumbing down, bringing it all down. Oh, legacy stuff. Okay, so yeah, that existed, like the Alice in Wonderland, that whole lord and that whole thing. They married because their relationships, their reproductive things that they're talking about, they're designed to what's that called? They're designed, they've done that, like the state, the establishment, the monarchy, that whole regime psychology has ingrained reproduction and that whole thing, or has ingrained the empire, the regime tactics into your very basic nature. So when you think about reproducing and all this other stuff, at least back then, they were thinking about reproducing for the benefit of what? The empire. Lords marrying, you know, higher stature, you know, women in, you know, and they just keep building and building and building. They're building empires through your basic ignorance. Like you're basic, so you're just a monkey, just, you know, not your. So this is what it is. The real people, when you have a monarchy, like a king and a queen and all this, even the president and all that other stuff, this so-called democracy and so-called capital, when you have all that, what you're saying is in the long run and overall is that the only people that matter, or the only perspectives that matter, are the perspectives that get televised or they get spoken about by the people who matter, who are like lords and monarchs and all that other, that, or whatever, that whole world. So this is where we are right now. So like I was saying, this exists in family men, people, and how that parasitic mentality came over here. They did the same thing when they came over here. Came over here and said, we're settlers. We're not pirates taking your land. We're your friends. We're trading. And when in fact they were just stealing everything and poisoning everything, and then hoping that over time we would just fucking forget. And largely that's what's going on right now. And they're still banking on that and getting pissed off at people because some people don't forget. It's like, wait a second, how the fuck are you just gonna keep acting like we were supposed to forget this? We don't. You ain't never gonna talk about this. What are you talking about? This is your land. This is your thing, and that whole thing. So I'm just putting this on the background. This is like Smooth Sounds, I think. He's a pretty cool, or it's a pretty cool channel. I don't know who runs it or anything, but yeah, it's just a good background thing. And I don't want to, go through all kinds of like meme and what was I talking about? So yeah, when the so-called settlers, which were pirates, came over here, and this is what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying like anybody's fault, like blame or anything. What I'm saying, because most people are just fucking ignorant. Your ancestors are ignorant as fuck. So they just follow whatever the state and the government told them to do too. So that's why I'm so like kind of surprised when people today are talking about like, oh, I'm not trying to face the establishment today. It's like, that's why the fucking thing is. That's why we are right where we are right now. Like, when the fuck is it? Is it whose responsibility is it to do it? Like, is it your son and your daughters? Or how about your grandkids? Or about your great-grandkids? Your great-great-great-grandkids? Great-great-great-great-great-grand? Whose turn is it to say something about this? See, a lot of these people who are calling themselves truthers and all this other shit, they're just fucking lazy. And in order to hide the laziness, they're going to hide it behind a bunch of extra nothing for no reason. Extra nothing for no reason. But it looks like a lot. You can edit the shit out of a whole bunch of extra nothing for no reason, and put a whole bunch of really good production and editing techniques into, and make a whole bunch of videos. Extra nothing for no reason. And and I say no reason because no reason in reference, like in reference to the macro scale. And I know that, and I'm generalizing again as far as like the macro and the micro. No reason. There's obviously many reasons for the individual in the individual world, but I'm talking about the macro perspective, and the individual perspectives in reference to the macro perspective are only a small percentage of the macro percentage. And when you're talking about massive mind control, so yes, it matters, and at the same time, it really doesn't matter. Like I said, percentage-wise, we're talking about influence, like alchemical influence. You can bounce back and forth and use them as comparisons, but ultimately, what's going on is that excuse me. Ultimately, what's going on is that there are two different types of compatible systems, but not comparable systems. They're not really comparable. They're not meant to be compared. You can compare them for example purposes, but that's, like I said, is going to be only for examples, like generalizing. But when you get really down to it, there really is no comparison there. So getting back to the relationships, because this is all a part of it. This is all a part of like who you are looking to be in a relationship with. And that's a whole nother thing. Like, some people can spend their entire lives learning to be in a relationship with themselves, because maybe they've never done that before. Maybe they never realized what that was. Maybe they spent many different lifetimes just having like externalized relationships. They never even fucking realized it. Like, this is what I said, because a lot of like the way we express ourselves is a reflection of this kind of this parasitic virus, like this thing that exists not only in the individual or the micro, but the macro perspectives, or the macro consciousness, the micro and the macro consciousness. So when you have people who are largely ignorant or unaware of the macro and the micro psychological, spiritual, and physical warfares, you've narrowed a lot of things down to basically, or a lot of individuals or groups of people down to basically kind of a very select, a very select few people. The relationship with yourself, relationship with time, relationship with this experience, the relationship with like friends and family, like overall, not individually, but overall, like how that individual inhabits or expresses those relationships. Like what is their philosophy, then, like, in a sense, like what is their philosophy of what those relationships mean? Like that stuff matters in regular relationships, and like in individual, like one-on-one relationships. And largely, like everything that I just fucking said right now is taboo in like mainstream circles, or even like groups or anything like that. Like you can't even talk like, oh, that's deep, like you want to talk, like it's like off limits. People get really, really insecure when you start talking about even a small fraction of what I mentioned just in this little video right now. So that is part of the control mechanism. Like people are policing themselves because the ego is inflamed so much, and the insecurity is the god. Like the insecurity becomes the god of the ego after insecurity becomes the norm. So when everybody is insecure about everything, then you have a bunch of insecure relationships going on and on and on and on, blaming each other for work that they haven't, done on their own. So you can't do a lot of the work that you need to do for yourself if you're with somebody else. Like that's across the board. Like eventually, like if you can live 500 years long, like you could be able to do something like that, like because the time is spent out so long, and eventually over that time, if you don't become one with that other individual in that long, then fuck, well, shit, then it's ridiculous. So anyway, point being is that there's a lot of benefit in working on yourself with yourself, and that is nothing but a double positive. In like forever, like it's like an exponential growth in the positive when you go into a relationship with somebody else, because you're not only at a better space for yourself, you're at a better space for the other individual, and then you're not even gonna open yourself up to somebody else who's gonna be, fucking with, like, vibing on anything lower than that. So it kind of boils down to like growth relationships after that. When right now the norm is broken, empty relationships hidden by a half person having a relationship with another half person, or a half broken person with another half broken person, and then those half broken people get together and make kind of not broken babies, and for the beginning, until they break them because they didn't fix themselves in order to not have a broken, they create quarter broken babies, and then eventually those quarter broken babies grow up to half broken adolescents, and then adults, and then those adults, even before they even get to heal themselves beyond that half and quarter shit that they had fucked up from their previous generations, they're already at 30, 40 years old and either have babies or thinking about having babies right now, and then the cycle continues. So that is the consciousness that is maintained throughout society in order to maintain the control over those masses. This is how relationships fit into the massive psychological warfare and spiritual and physical warfare across the board. So once you narrow all that stuff down, you're a different person. Like in my space, like I don't even like affiliate, like really consider myself that whole, the whole human perspective, because like if I was going to ask anybody right now, give me a definition of what human is, you know, I'm going to get some Webster's dictionary, some bullshit. And just to even assume that perspective or to assume that identity is to, it's an exact, what's that terminology, what is that word, not reflection, but it's the same sort of thing as, damn it, I had it and I lost it because I was thinking about the other word for reflection. So but it's not reflection. It's like a mirror image of, hold on a second. I forgot what I was talking about anyway, so I can't replay it on here. But the people who are listening know what I'm talking about when I say reflection. That's not the actual word. It's like I can't even, like, if I remember what the hell I was saying, then I'd be able to go further. Maybe it'll come back later. So looping back to relationships. Maybe it'll come back if I come from that perspective. So just the same way as your relationship with yourself is going to reflect in the relationship with somebody else. Okay, so yeah, the broken, they play the superheroes for a broken society that has been maintained, has been broken on purpose. Broken people create this so-called democracy, so-called capitalistic system that makes it seem like they are creating or putting their leaders up into power to do something for them as the evolutionary peak of this reality. The leaders of the actual people, like in the Black Panther Party and so on and so forth. Anybody else who is even perceived as a leader in a massive way is taken out in some kind of way, and then who gets promoted is emptiness. So emptiness in society is a reflection of the emptiness in the individual and vice versa. And then it just feeds itself. That parasite, that virus just feeds itself through everybody's relationship over and over and over again. Because before they have the time to work on themselves, they have already invested their soul into another soul journey or a soul responsibility. So being like having being in a relationship with another person or having children, so it's like you owned or like accepted a responsibility in there in some kind of way to, and so that's a learning experience and so on and so forth. So anyway, when you go into that space by yourself and you fly to those places and you come back to the norm of like societal consciousness, you see far less people. Like you see far less, maybe that's what it was, going back to the definitions, like humanity. You don't really affiliate with that. It kind of dumbs you down. So you become the reflection of what you label yourself as. So if you call yourself human, and human is what? Defined by what? The Big Bang, evolution, Darwin, monkeys, you. That's your pride. That's who you are. All of that's empty. So your rooted nature is a fairy tale. Like, so when you really put it down, like when you really look into it, you'll realize like there's some solid things in your reality. Like there's some solid, like you like love for like motherly love. Like that's some solid ass shit. Your interpretation of who and what you are in this realm needs to be as solid as the energetic frequency of what motherly love is. I don't have to say that again because you already know what the fuck that means and what that feels like. I can give many different examples of what that is, but I don't have to go any further than that. I'm just using that motherly love sort of thing as an example, as something deeply rooted into this experience in some kind of way. Not as, something to put on a pedestal and so on and so forth. Strictly as an example and a comparison to like the emptiness that we have when we interpret our own selves in this experience. What the fuck is a human? Oh, well, it's, the Big Bang and the gravity and the Earth and dinosaurs and then Stanley Kubrick, he did like a video showing the monkeys and then they. So hopefully the video still ran until that point. But this is, I'll get into like the personal part of the relationships stuff now because this is what kind of triggered this whole video, and it's a good way to kind of see how like the way we are attacked on the soul, the mind, and the body are expressed in our own relationships, and are expressed in even our children, fucking random interactions, and it's disgusting in so many different ways. So I mean, the randomness and all this other, I don't want to make it seem like, oh yeah, well, there's some beauty to all this other stuff. Before I'm talking about like there's a certain, what is it called? It's kind of like a flavor of information for people to see a picture with a whole bunch of different examples. So yes, there are other examples of the beauty and so on and so forth. I'll save that for another video. But for this video, this has a particular vibe to it. So anyway, back to the individual relationship. So I just gave you all those examples of like the micro relationship with the macro relationship and how that's expressed in our own like personal relationships, like a man and a woman and having babies and creating generations and so on and so forth, and how that relationship is interacting with society. So on a personal note, for me, when I thought I was out of that space, because that's what happens. When I thought I was out of that whole world of, broken this and broken that, I had thought it was in the time frame when I was in the New Age community and the New Age mentality. I had just left Teotihuacan. I visited Teotihuacan. I visited Sedona. I had visited Mount Shasta, the pyramids at Giza, Machu Picchu. Did some traveling to other places, the part of the world when I was in the military before that, and when I got out. And I was finishing up my kind of like spiritual. It's not a journey because it's always a journey, but there was a certain kind of potency to that certain time frame, to where it wasn't a journey. It was like a focused part of the journey. Like you're in the shit. Like it was the shit part of the journey, like the good shit part of the journey. And not good as in the rest is bad. Just like in like you're on point. Like you're on some kind of transitional whatever. Like to transition from the psychological to the spiritual warfare. Like clearing all that shit out. So when you're in that transition and you start clearing that stuff out, you don't really know when you've cleared that shit out. Like you don't know that's the whole game to it all. So when I started clearing all that out, I hadn't been in many relationships at all. I was just kind of like, I'd rather be on. I know I got a lot of work to do. I know there's some things that I need to work on just from the little relationships that I had and seeing like reflections and all that other stuff. Like I have like at that time this sort of perspective of like, well, any kind of relationship that I get into is going to be from a space of kind of like spiritual acknowledgement. So and then I started there, and then that was it. And there was nothing. There was like kind of like I was explaining kind of these other channels. There was no substance to it. It was just like, yeah, you're human, or yeah, just find a relationship with somebody who thinks spiritual like you, or something like that. And then that was it. And then that's who you think you are. So look at how long and how deep and how complex you had to go through in the psychological warfare, and look at how complex even the physical warfare is. Now multiply that times like 1,000,000, and think about the spiritual warfare shit that's going on, both with you individually and on the macro scale, and on the other individual that you're going to be in a relationship with, and on society, and the fact that that system is forever evolving. It's growing. And you have to evolve and grow yourself in order to not be subjected to it. And that's why the system teaches you that anti-history and so on and so forth. So anyway, back to the individual stuff. So we at that point, not saying we anymore. I'm talking about me. When I came out of that spiritual journey, sort of, what is that called? Like phase of time, like phase of chunk of time in my life. And large, like I said, it's labeled as a chunk of time in my life because the new age, part of that is it's like a phase. It's not a real, like that. The person I was at that time frame wasn't a real person. It was still like regurgitating a lot of other shit that felt a certain way, but it wasn't rooted in like me. I can share perspectives of what that stuff said, but from my own reality now. Whereas people in the New Age community, they're just kind of just like, kind of how people name drop, or they just kind of like either meme drop or quote drop or crystal drop or sacred geometry drop or Reiki drop, like whatever it is, they drop something. And then if over time they've been dropping shit all day on themselves and other people, they eventually believe the shit that they've been dropping everywhere, and they're just dropping shit all over the place. So that's why I said not a real person. Like it's no different than somebody who comes from like a privileged family and then never has any kind of experiences in their life, and they're all about money, so they're not really any substance. There's no substance to them. So this happens in like relationships and so on and so forth, in extreme cases. Anyway, what was I saying? The New Age community. So the New Age community is a community based upon that spiritual emptiness. And I use that term loosely because, like I said, think about both of those terms. You have to think of both of those terms, emptiness and spiritual. So it's not saying that it's worthless. Like I learned a lot of spiritual things and perspectives of reality from being in that spiritually empty community. This is why I say nowadays it's so dangerous to even have that shit existing and people going through that, because it's still catching people. It's like a web. And then it just sucks the life out of, anyway. So that New Age community at that time for me, how I was like, what I was researching and what I felt like without, cross-referencing that with anything else, that was all just like it was, like I said, it was the same way like a Paris Hilton thinks that she's a certain kind of way because she was raised with a whole bunch of money, like the way she carries herself, that's not real confidence. Like that's not real, like experiential sort of, you know what I mean? Like substance. There's nothing there. It's all based upon like a drive-through persona, a drive-through soul. People who come from that perspective have like a drive-through artificial, soul expression in kind of way. Just to put it into an extreme so people can see where I'm coming from. So I was in that space from the New Age perspective at around like 2012. Even before that, a little bit before that, but that was around the time when I stopped traveling and I said, all right, well, now I'm going to start working on my art. That's when I started doing the embroidery. I wanted to learn what this stuff meant. So I was originally a writer. I started out as a writer, an English major, then went into, started embroidering because I could speak more with images. So once that became too slow, I started to challenge myself to be able to speak what I was, understanding, and overstanding from the symbolism, and then when I was writing before that, and so on and so forth, and what I was studying. So that's where I am now. But before that, like when I was thinking at that time frame, even before I came back here to Arizona from Peru, I was, in people in the ayahuasca ceremonies, when you're an ayahuasca shaman, they ask all kinds of questions. So people were asking relationship questions. When I asked relationship questions too, as everybody else was asking, and it was interesting. So I did. And it was just very general. I didn't really get much, depth out of it. But that's what happens in a lot of it's just the way you interpret it. But now I have a higher interpretation of what he was saying now. But anyway, at that time, and even now, it's still very general. But anyway, point being is that when I came back here, I thought I had all the shit figured out. I thought I was aware of it was, and all I needed to do was find, my soulmate, my twin flame, my, all that shit that's thrown out in the New Age community. My other half and all that. You start looking for other half, and that means you was a half-ass motherfucker. So, anyway. So that's where I was when I came back here. So I had already set this up in my head. And I said, I don't even want to be in a relationship. While I was traveling, I was saying, I don't even want to really be open to a relationship if I'm going to be traveling. I want to be, anchored somewhere and be cool. So when I got here, I met, so this is gonna be like an example of all the other examples that happen. So keep this in mind when I'm explaining this relationship. It's a reflection of all the other relationships prior to this, because it's a good example of what that kind of broken relationship world consciousness, how it affects and lives in us. And it might not be for everybody. This is just how it was for me, and I've seen it in other people too. So, but anyway. So when I got here, New Age community, think I'm already, clear of the spiritual warfare, intellect or psychological warfare, physical warfare. I think I'm, whatever. I'm there. I'm, speaking to my ancestors and the angels and all this other shit, and I'm understanding and channeled information from all these New Age channelers. I know what they talking about, and in fact, that shit's getting old and slow. So I think I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I'm all this other stuff. Anyway, so beautiful woman comes into my life. She's already in a relationship. At that time, it was a fucked up relationship. And I was just completely overtaken by this woman, and it was just like it was kind of shocking. It was very shocking to me, the amount of connection, or whatever you want to call it, attraction that I had. And in that moment, I was, this is, keep in mind, in the New Age community, it's all about like follow your heart, follow the, go with the flow, that whole journey, that whole shit. So I'm in that space, and at the same time, I'm like, wait a second, this is way too easy. You don't even know this. You don't know this woman. You don't even know yourself. Like, if you can allow yourself to fall that hard for somebody you don't even know, like, is it really all like? Is it really about is that what this twin flame soulmate shit is? So that's when I started to analyze and really question a lot of this new age bullshit. I was like, wait a second, that's what that community is saying, but that don't seem real to me at all. That just seemed like some like loose sort of prescription drug, new age prescription drug kind of interpretations of what's going on. It never sat well for me. But for other people, I'm seeing them go into relationships, back to back to back, in that world. Like, oh, I met my soulmate, and, two new age people, whatever, they get there. You don't even have to be new age people. They just slightly kind of understanding what, the not, something outside of the mainstream kind of consciousness. And, oh, that's good enough. And I'm not saying it's not good enough. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, for me personally, I'm not going into nothing as serious as like a relationship with some old bogus ass, just like American dream ass, new age bullshit. Nah, this shit's gonna be real. It's gonna be something that is gonna be deeply rooted, and it's not gonna be any kind of like, oh yeah, let's just whatever. And you can only go there with people who can go there. You can't go there with people who try to fake that shit. I've been around women who try to fake that shit. You can't fake that shit. You will be exposed immediately. That shit is fucking ridiculous. So that's a side effect to the new age community. The insecurity is a side effect to new agers who get exposed for their new ageness. They just, a lot of this shit happens. It gets expressed in religious relationships too, or mainstream religious, kind of relationships, where as soon as you start, bringing up questions and about religion or any kind of thing like that, some of them taking it personal, some of them get insecure about it, and some of them don't. They run in many different kinds of ways. There's all different kinds of reactions to that. Point being is that it's a big deal. And it's a big deal because it's a reflection of the individual. And a lot of the times, people hide behind, their high and mighty sort of mainstream Christianity or religious sort of perspectives. They hide behind that shit in order to not really change or really do anything or really face anything. And a lot of the times, it's to run from a lot of shit too, like the Catholic guilt and all that shit. Or if anybody can do anything wrong, and then they can just go to church the next day, confess their sins to the pastor, and then boom, they are free and clear of their sins, and they can just walk down the street and be cool. Like, how fucked up is that? So that's the norm. So that shit exists in regular relationships with individuals, and that's that insecurity. So that insecurity exists. A lot of people run away from the work that needs to be done in that insecure world by running into relationships. So they run away from themselves by running into relationships. This is what happens a lot of the times overall, very generally speaking, with all relationships as a whole. Like I said, two broken ass people trying to create one kind of not broken person relationship, and hopefully some babies that ain't broke too. That's the norm for society right now. People who are coming into another interpretation of what this who and what they are and what this realm is, they're saying no, it ain't about that. It's something more than that. We got to go further than this. And that is in the growth and expansion realm, that they're not compatible. That old shit, you can't bring that old shit into the new. See, that's that in between world shit that I was talking about in the last video, where the very nature of the American dream is counterproductive to the healing of the indigenous or the Aboriginal American people. and America as a whole, North America, South America as a whole. Anything in colonial, like the healing of the colonial wounds, like the healing of all this empire, everything that this empire did to the people in the land to get to where it is right now, that healing, it's very much like damn near impossible to heal those wounds when the majority of the people and the system itself still takes pride in inflicting those wounds and avoiding those wounds. And like in that Joe Rogan video talking about how beautiful that Robert E. Lee statue is, when they're talking about why the statues should be removed, the Confederate statues should be removed. Like, you see how, like, that, just him saying that one little quick response of, "Ooh, that's a beautiful piece of art. Ooh, what are they going to do with it when they take it down?" You know, you can hear them defending this parasitic consciousness. And it's the slickest shit ever. We just let it go by. We don't even pay attention to it, but it's the slickest shit ever. So anyway, that slickness exists in relationships, and people are just kind of like getting over or manipulating or controlling people, and before you know it, you know, they get comfortable over a few years have passed, and they don't want to start over with anybody else and do all that other things. So, you know, that's what gets maintained. It's that laziness, that comfort, that whole just like, oh, well, here we go. This is a, I guess we're normal. And like I said, it's that whole like you're abnormal if you're not in a relationship. You know, people say that like people don't really take the perspective I'm taking in like in this video. Like that mentality exists in the psyche of, you know, people because of what I explained earlier. When you have people who are constantly filling themselves with external fillers, they're not really going to change. They're not really going to grow. So that's beneficial to have ignorant, dumb, broken, looking for external ways to fill themselves people. That's beneficial for the system. So they will constantly trigger sex in the commercials and in the movies and in like politics and so on. They'll trigger a lot of this stuff. So what was I saying in reference to maybe I'll explain that another time. So that's what it was. So another good example of this is like kind of like how I see tipping people in reference to like the way society sees tipping people. So the mainstream thing for tipping people, and this is not like across the board, and this is just how I'm sharing examples of, you know, how fucked up society is. So like anytime somebody serves me when I'm out, I'm thinking like, okay, that's at least like $5 like to tip, because that tipping is different from like your service. Like what they're getting paid to work there ain't got shit to do with you. Like, yeah, they gotta work there, but that's for them and their managers. Like, they're serving you. So if they're serving you and they're being cool, and even if they're just doing, you know, regular shit and they don't even have to be cool with you, like that's extra. Like or like when they're cool with you, they're being extra. Like they're only required to really serve you. So anybody who's serving me, in my eyes, that's extra. Like you're in the service. Like you're serving. So for your service, I'm gonna tip you at least like starting out at like $5 for like a meal, or if I'm out drinking or whatever. Usually it's like a meal. I'll just have like a, you know, just a dinner and that's it. So anyway, let me start with the mainstream one, and I'll work my way back, because this is going to relate to the relationship thing too. So what does the mainstream world tell you to do in reference to tipping? It's like 10, 15, 20% of the bill. So really, you're like basing how cool of a person or how much good of a service this person was in this interaction, and then you work some kind of numerical percentage out, and then you provide that for them. Like you're basically judging them as they serve you, and their judgment is their tip. And then if you judge them into like, how dare, like, they did not serve me properly, then you judge them, you pay them less than what the normal societal thing requires, and then they get hit with that ego hit, like, ooh, they hit me, I didn't serve it well. And then, so we treat the service industry, people serving us, like the government treats us. Like I explained this, and I will just say this quickly. The same way the main or modern society promotes having relationship with like dogs and stuff like that. Like, you got to break a dog to be like your servant, and this is what the government does to us. So this is what happens in like the service industry. Like I said, they emphasize that dog and that man's best friend sort of relationship in order to emphasize the slave and the slave master relationship in human or in people interactions. So subconsciously you think it's okay to be broken and to be attacked by an authoritarian figure like the establishment, because you do that with lower consciousness beings like dogs and cats and shit like that. So this is how it affects in like relationships. So in society, when you go out to a restaurant, like, there's a sense of entitlement that people have in this bullshit with like tipping and all that shit. Like, they're your fucking slaves now. It's bullshit. So that is a good example of, or a good comparison to like what the mainstream examples are of like a regular relationship. So a regular relationship is supposed to look like, Zach Morris and Kelly Kapowski on Saved by the Bell. Like, that's a real relationship. So the same way goes for like tipping. Like, for me, it's not so much about like how much you tip. It's more in this example right now, I'm talking about like the idea of putting something on like somebody's presence, like a monetary value on a service person's presence. Like, that's a fucked up thing to do, but that's the norm. So like, if I go eat dinner and I spend like, $12 on a meal, and I sat there and like, and I just, did dinner, just no drinks, no nothing, just dinner at a bar because I'm by myself, or at a bar at a restaurant because I'm by myself. So my tab comes out to, like less than $10. Am I supposed to tip her like $2 or something like that? Like, no, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, her service is more, for me, is more than like $2. It's actually more than $5, but like I said, there's a window there, to where, and at the same time, like, shit, I ain't got a lot of fucking money anyway, and I ain't trying. So there's a balance anyway. But the balance that I see is that, like, so like if I tip her $5 on like a $10 bill, it looks like, ooh, like a $50, like, in that world. But it's not comparable because people ain't looking at it from my perspective. My perspective is, no, I always do that anytime I go out, because your service is not based, like, my definitions of your service is not based upon like the percentages that the establishment gives me to judge you on. Like, their dictations for my interactions with you are non-existent. Like, and the money is just there. The tip thing is just there as an example. It's like a piece to focus on as an example of how we interact with each other and like this whole realm as a whole. Largely, we are given that whole 10, 15, 20% tip sort of thing, not as like because they are the authorities and they know the best thing. No, they do that to remain the authorities, and they do that to also keep that whole like rich, the rich get richer, poor get poorer, the haves and the have not world afloat. And that whole breaking of society thing, it's complexities on down the line of what that stuff means. Well, we don't look at it like that. We don't see it like that. And look at all the side effects from something like this. How many interactions every day of people in the service industry having to deal with, somebody who either tips them too much because they're like being some fucking slimy ass, garbage ass human being, or not even human being, just a piece of shit. It's like a garbage ass individual. And other people who tip nothing because they're garbage individuals. And then other people who, I'll just leave it there. So the extremes of the both worlds, and then, interactions, personalities that people have to interact with in the service industry. So one, just think about how many. Let's just say there's like 50 interactions a day. So up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Mostly down because of the way the system is designed. Your ups are not even real ups. There a lot of them are ups, and those are few and far between, because the real ups are when you get like really cool ass people. Like people who are dialed in and present and all that other stuff. And maybe even they tip you well too. So that's like really cool. But the main thing is their presence, and that's the biggest tip right there. Point being is that the establishment dictates your basic relationships. So, like I said, tips and all that other stuff, like the same way the American dream and all that other stuff is ingrained in your personal relationships. This is the examples is like tips. So, back to the relationship, the individual relationship. Even when I was in the New Age community, thinking I was all spiritual and looking at this spiritual community, like, and my spiritual self, and looking at a spiritual relationship, even at that space, I was still basing my relationship tip percentages off of an establishment psyche, an establishment percentage number. So I was like, yeah, relationships mean 10%, 15%, 20%. And that's all I need to be in a spiritual relationship. You see what I mean? In that space now, like that's why I said that to compare the two. Because I still didn't know who I was or what I was looking for in a relationship. Because I hadn't known who I was. So it was like, I'm not going to know what I want in a relationship until I know who I am in a relationship with myself. So once I become, closer with that relationship with myself, then I'll be able to not only see, what it is that I'm looking for, or what it is that I'm open to in a relationship, but also attract the woman who's going to be a representation of that internal, that non-physical thing that I am open to, or energy that I am open to. So this is the thing. You're going to attract what you are both consciously and unconsciously and subconsciously open to. So the shit that you are unconsciously, like, that you hadn't worked on, or and the subconsciously hadn't worked on and consciously hadn't worked on, you will attract all that shit. Because that's the stuff that is needing to be done in order for you to attract anything higher than that. This is why I say it's so important to focus on the human story more than anything else, like flat earth and the Mandela effect, all that other bullshit, because it's the same thing. If you really want to move forward in any kind of fashion, you need to first heal yourself. People just want to, we're all one. We need to unify. You're divisive. We'll just move forward. No, motherfucker, we got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of healing to do. And a lot of people are running away from that healing because they don't want to have to deal with that shit. It's way more complex than that, but for to keep it simple, that's largely part of it. So the relationship thing at that time was being reevaluated for me, because I could have easily gone into that space and been like, this is it. I found her. She's everything that and then, I could have built up that whole world and been in that whole space and, maybe even have been happy based upon, whatever it is that I chose to be happy in that world. And because we adjust to a lot of different things. And the point being is that there was something more there that I needed to be understanding and overstanding about the relationship that I have with myself before I start externalizing my relationship with a woman who was going to be like, all right, well, what is it that we are really going into a relationship for?